Hello to our online friends. Thank you for joining us. We are going to turn to Numbers 12, 16. Or wait, just Numbers 12. It should be 1 through 16. I'm sorry. You can put that on your paper.
Numbers 12, 1 through 16.
Yep. So I just have verse 16 there. I don't know why, but story of my life with doing these papers. Where's my secretary when I need her? All right. So this is called the high cost of pride. It was called realizing you're not all that in a bag of chips. But I changed it. My husband's like, and I'm not sure if I've done one in the past like that or what. Anyway, so too many times we think more of ourselves than what we really should. And that is pride. You know, we like to think we're not prideful. If somebody asks us, are you a prideful person? Most of us are going to say, probably not. But you know what? It's a very important area for us to check in with God and ask Him if we're prideful. Because just the smallest seed of pride can make you say or do things that you never thought you would do before. And you might, or I might, chalk it up to something different. But what is in the middle of pride? The letter I. I am in the middle of pride. And I think I did do a Sunday school lesson on that. But being prideful is not something God wants us to be. It is not a good characteristic of a Christian lady. And so it's something that we, and if God hates it, we don't want anything to do with it. So that means us, me not necessarily saying, oh, I'm not really prideful. I don't really have an issue with that. But instead asking God. So we're going to look at an example of a woman in the Bible that struggled with pride. This is the most interesting chapter to me. All right, so Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 to 16. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Verse 4, and the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam, come out ye three under the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. Verse 6, and he said, hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. Verse 8, with him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then, were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed when he cometh out of his mother's womb. Verse 13, and Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. Verse 15, and Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again. In verse 16, and afterward the people removed from Hazeroth and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. So interesting to me. I mean, just the whole chapter is wow. It's important to keep in mind a couple of things when we read this passage. And sometimes it's just neat to go to a passage and just look it over and just read it several times. I was listening on my Bible app again over and over this morning. But the first thing we're going to look at, and we're going to learn some lessons from this, was that, number one, God has chosen Moses to lead his people. Okay? God chooses. And the point under that is God points out that Moses was a very meek man. Okay? And that was verse 3. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. These are God's, I know it's not in red letter, but this whole book is God's words. So God is saying this about Moses. Now the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. That's a pretty big thing. Meek. So he had humility. And if you'll remember some of the story about Moses, Moses had done he was chosen by God, but he still had some rough patches. I mean, and we're going to see later on, he even killed an Egyptian. Now he was doing it because he was fighting with an Israelite, one of his brethren, so to speak, and so he killed the Egyptian. He killed the guy that came to him and said, was that how it went? I'm sorry. No, he killed the Egyptian because they were fighting, right? Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. Forgive me, I was
thinking because the Egyptian was
really
fighting against that.
Yeah, and then someone ended up coming to Moses and saying, I saw that, and that's when Moses took off. So yes, I did have it right. Forgive me, I just had
This is when they was building the wall.
No, so this is what Moses was brought up in Pharaoh's house.
Right.
If you'll remember that Miriam was the little sister that was by the water. The mom wanted to save Moses, so she put him in the basket and put him in the river where all the alligators and stuff were, because all the babies that were under a certain age were supposed to be killed. She wanted to save her baby, so that was the way she saved him, and she sent Miriam to keep an eye on him. And then Pharaoh's daughter came, and she bathed, and she saw the basket and heard the baby, and had her maids go over and fetch the basket, and saw that it was an Egyptian baby, and she knew exactly what the situation was. She knew the decree, the rule, that all the babies were supposed to be killed, and so she was going to take them home. And Miriam said, I know a nurse, of course the mom. So these things are important to keep in mind. And then to follow up with what Peggy said, so he grew up in Pharaoh's house, okay? But he still knew who he was. He knew his identity, and then he came along and he knew how the Israelites were treated, the children, the Hebrews, and so he saw a Hebrew and an Egyptian fighting, and I imagine he had seen that his whole years growing up, and he had enough, and I should have wrote down the passage for you. I'll put it out on the thread later so you can take a look at it. But so the point is that Moses knew he had done wrong. Okay, so I think he was a meek man anyway, a humble man anyway. But knowing his past too, he really was humble. And you'll notice that he doesn't. We don't find anywhere in this passage where he goes, "What are you guys saying about me?" There's no righteous indignation with him. I think because he knows he has a past. It'd be like me. I have no place to talk because I know what God's forgiven me of. And I think we all could say that in some form of another, and that's God's grace. So anyway, so God points out that Moses was a very meek man, but we have to remember he was still chosen by God. The lesson here is that God chooses who he wants, okay? And let's go to James 4:6 real quick. James chapter 4, verse 6. But he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. God knew who Moses was and his character, and he wanted that meekness. I think a huge reason is because God can not work through somebody that's prideful. So he worked through Moses, he used Moses, but God chooses who he wants. It doesn't matter if they're our choosing. Guess what? It didn't matter if Aaron and Miriam thought that he was qualified for the job. When God called Moses to lead the children of Israel out, Moses is like, whoa, no, I'm not a public speaker, not good at this. My brother, though, he's a talker. He's the one that could do this. So, but God's like, no. And in fact, we'll see number 2, another point with this passage is Miriam and Aaron are Moses' sister and brother. Okay, again, going back to Miriam being watching her little brother be put in that basket by her mom in order to save his life, and the mom and Miriam, off her mother's faith, knowing that everything's going to be okay. And what an opportunity when she could jump out and say, I know a nurse, so meaning a wet nurse, someone to care for him. So Moses' mother, all these other moms, their babies had been killed. But she stepped out by faith, and she said, I'm going to trust God in this because I know it's not right. And just what a scary time that must have been. But so Miriam and Aaron are Moses' sister and brother. Point A under that, they were to act as Moses' helper, assistant, and voice when instructed. God did use them, okay? So Aaron did act as the voice a lot. And, because remember, Moses is like, I can't speak. So, but the thing is that God had chosen Moses, and he chose Miriam and Aaron, allowed them to be the helpers here, okay? So the lesson that we, and I put under it, the idea was never for them to usurp Moses' God-given authority. Moses was the one chosen to be the leader, okay? The lesson here is there are many different parts of the body of Christ, which is the church. God knows exactly who should be the eyes of the body. God knows who should be the hands of the body. And sometimes, Tiff may be a hand and Ashley may be a hand, so they're both doing the same kind of things. God knows who should be the pastor, okay? It's not, I don't know if you've ever heard the term deacon-run church, okay? We have deacons, but it's not a deacon-run church, okay? Their job is to do what? Assist and help the pastor, okay? The pastor is the pastor is the shepherd, okay? And I'm glad my husband does it this way, because we have just watched friends, ministry acquaintances. We started the church here with the help of Grace Baptist in Delaware, and under the leadership and guidance of Pastor Corey Bain, and then Baptist Church Planning Ministries. So they helped form the foundation of this church, and they guided my husband, okay, and said, okay, do this. Brother Gardner, he was a huge help. I remember my husband was going to put his pay, and he was going to do it really, really low, just to be a blessing. And I remember Brother Gardner at the time going, no. They were the Helping Hands ministry at that time, and they came and they helped us for a year to start the church. He said, no, do not set it that way. And man, looking back, how wonderful, because, that's what we make now, 15 years later. And what if my husband had gone with that amount? Because you can, as a pastor, you can always feel like, well, we can do less, and, the church needs it, that kind of thing. But it was under the guidance and leadership and experience of Brother Gardner saying no. And that was the way it was with everything with the church, is that Pastor Bain, Brother Gardner, Brother Earl Jessup of BCPM, they guided. But different parts of the body, and the pastor does have to make some decisions. So back to deacon-run churches, is that we know ministry acquaintances that go and take a church. They're voted in by a group, what do they call that? A board committee, where they vote them in. And I'm not saying that's not necessary. It can be necessary, but then they never disband from that, and they run the preacher, okay? They take away God's guidance of the shepherd and allowing him to make decisions. If we voted on everything in this church, goodness, What a nightmare that would be. You know, but God knows who should be the shepherd, and he's called my husband to be the shepherd here. He knows who should be the Sunday school teacher. Brother Joe has been called to be the Sunday school teacher. I have been. Some of you sitting here, you may be called to be a Sunday school teacher. We don't know. This is God doing this. He knows who should be the nursery workers. That's one of the most important jobs in this church, is the nursery workers. Yeah, etc. So the lesson is, don't ever be jealous of someone else's part to play. And it sounds kind of like, oh, this is a big play production. But I heard a pastor talk about it once, but we all have our part to play. And it's not demeaning things here. It's just a way of looking at it. Like, we all have a role. My husband's the pastor. His job is not in the nursery. Okay, now ultimately he oversees all this stuff, you know, but there has to be a chief, there has to be a leader, okay, and he's it. But all the parts of the body of Christ are needed. The person who cleans is needed, or it takes multiple people to clean. And just what a blessing. But don't ever be jealous of someone else's part that they play. Don't ever look at pastor, you know, and say, well, if I was in charge. Well, you know what? You wouldn't want to be if you knew everything. Okay? And even a Sunday school teacher, we're all at different parts of our journey, and sometimes you're not ready, or maybe you're a better fit for doing this over here. Or maybe someone is a better fit, maybe not being a deacon, but instead being a Sunday school teacher or something like that. And sometimes it can be, you know, where you do several different things. Lots of times in the small churches, that's what we do. But don't ever be jealous of someone else's part to play. Be thankful and happy of what part God has you to play. Whether it's, and you know what, everybody can have a part, okay? I think of Miss Donna, she has other parts, but I think of her card ministry. She writes those cards and sends them out. That's a role that God has given her. And she's good at it, and she remembers, and me, I can't even remember my own birthday, let alone y'all's. So, let's go to Romans 12:16. Let's go there and read that verse. Every part of the body of Christ is important. If you think to yourself, I don't know what my part is, come see me. I will get you a part. And you may say, well, I don't want to clean. Well, why not? You know what? I'm a Sunday school teacher and the pastor's wife. I clean. Why shouldn't I? You know, we all have parts to play, and there's things that we all can do. Now, can everybody be the pastor? No. Can everybody be the Sunday school teacher? No. Can everybody be the deacon? No. Oh, yay! Jen, make me happy. I love it. Sorry to those online, but we just had the prodigal daughter come home. I love you. Oh, how wonderful. I know. How exciting. Oh, I love it. Okay, now I gotta. Okay, so don't ever be jealous of somebody else's part. Understand the part that God has given you to play. And no matter what it is, it's important. Just texting somebody is a role to play, and saying, I miss you, we missed you at church, we missed you at church. And, you know, that is a role to play. Romans 12:16, who would like to read that?
I can.
Go ahead, Donna.
Be of the same mind one to another. Mind not high things, but condescend to men of low estate. Be not wise in your own conceit.
Be of the same mind one towards another. Whether you clean, whether you're a Sunday school teacher, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a pastor's wife, no matter, or the finance secretary, no matter what it is, they're all important. And that verse says, be of the same mind one towards another. I don't treat anybody any differently. You know, Donna does a lot of important stuff in our church. I mean, the financial piece is crucial. But I don't treat her any different than I do anybody else. Why? Because be of the same mind one towards another. Why should I? We all have different roles to play. Okay? It's just important that we play our role and we don't ever look at somebody else's and say, I could do that better. That's pride. And that is not thinking you should be more, like, I shouldn't be cleaning. I should be teaching Sunday school. That's only going to bring contention. And you are despising the role that God has you in there. If you want to be a Sunday school teacher, then come talk to Pastor about it, and we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, this is that is wonderful that you want to do that, but there are some things that we need to put in place in order for you to do that. So, but don't despise the role. Don't let pride come in and think, well, I'd do a better job growing this Sunday school class, or one of the men thinking, I'd do a better job in there, or junior church, I'd do a better job with those bus kids. Okay. Yeah, let's go to Proverbs 13:10. Proverbs 13:10. Jen, I can't even tell you how happy I am that you're sitting by me.
It's wonderful.
Proverbs 13:10. Anyone? Go ahead, Tanya.
Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well advised is wisdom.
Okay, contention's going to be like friction all the time. When I get prideful and think, I could do a better job with the bus ministry or the teen ministry, that is just going to make me very contentious as that seed of pride grows. Who am I? And it just goes back to, don't ever be jealous of someone else's role to play. Take your role and do it the absolute best that you can. Like I said on the thread this morning, I count it such a privilege to be the Sunday school teacher in here, and I do not take it for granted. My husband could not have me in here the same as any of the other Sunday school teachers. If he decided I was not where I need to be spiritually to be in this role, then he has every right and even a responsibility to take me out of this class and put somebody else in here. So just because I'm the pastor's wife does not mean that I automatically get to stay in here and teach you ladies. No, I have to be walking with the Lord. I can't be living contrary to the Word of God. I've got to be in obedience to it, just like Brother Joe does with his Sunday school class, just like Miss Donna does in order to be the finance secretary. Okay? So, don't ever be jealous of someone else's part to play. Play your part the best that you can. Yeah, sure.
To me, whenever I look at a position, it looks like it might be easy, but 9 chances out of 10, it's got a lot of responsibilities.
Yes, it does.
And I have said this, I know this is off the subject, but the bigger house takes the more work.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yep. So when you're thinking, Pastor, I could do better than he does. And not usually, women, but sometimes, actually, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Sometimes, yes, women will be like, why did God choose him? That is not, Miriam and Aaron, who cares if Moses was up to their snuff, their standard. God chose him. God chose Moses, and God knows exactly what he's doing. God chose my husband, and he knows exactly what he's doing. I've thought to myself many times, God knew my husband was the best fit to plant the Solid Rock Baptist Church here in Bell Fountain, and not somewhere else, but right here in Bell Fountain. He knew the people and how they would respond to him, how he would interact with the people. It just amazes me because, I can think of some of our other acquaintances in the ministry. They would never make it here. God didn't call them here. That's not their role. God called them somewhere else. Missionary Mike Wallace, God called him to Mexico, and he's thriving there. But, I would never, ever dream of looking at him or any of our other missionaries and saying, reading their stuff on the wall and going, man, they don't have a lot of fruit. I think of some of our missionaries in a little bit harder areas where it's totally Catholic, and they do not see a lot of salvations. But they're working, and they're praying, and they're visiting, and they're handing out the tract. They don't have as much fruit that we see as like the Wallaces. And he's very faithful in his updates. But and sometimes you hear about missionaries that go to the Philippines and they will have all these people saved, like Brother D. Philip Antonio said during a missions conference. But just because another couple in the ministry, another missionary couple, is not able to write, well, we had 10 saved today, doesn't mean that they're not doing the same exact thing, you know. So they are doing their role that God has called them to do. So don't ever think that we can do somebody else's role better. I know I can't clean the bathroom better, for sure. Number 3, the Bible also tells us that Miriam and Aaron decided it was okay to speak out against Moses, again, God's chosen leader, because of the Ethiopian woman he had married. And I put in there, any reason will do. And guess what? That means that Aaron and Miriam were doing what? It's exactly it. They were gossiping. And I know they're brother and sister. It doesn't make it okay. You know, we're sisters in Christ. Doesn't make gossiping okay. And we need to be very careful as women about that. There's a Bible verse that says, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin. I can't remember the reference for it, but story of my life. The more you talk, the more chances are that you're going to sin with your words. Okay, so just, you know, we have to be careful about that. But they were like chatting together. Oh, you know, who does he think he is? Yeah. Well, actually, he's God's chosen man. So I always think of this when it comes to the pastor. Be careful about talking, and I know he's my husband. Be careful about talking about my man. Now, be careful about talking about the man of God.
Yes.
Any man of God. Okay? And I'm not talking about a man on TV who preaches and who shouldn't be there and he's doing wrong, you know. Sometimes my husband will call him out and say that's not what I'm talking about. But you have a man of God, and there are men in the ministry who do not do things exactly like Pastor Frost does. But he still respects them. They are preaching the Word of God. They are leading God's people. And, you know, everything is not exactly the same as Pastor Frost. That's okay. He would never speak out against them. Okay? Now, if they're preaching heresy or if they're leading people wrong, he's going to speak out against that. Yes?
Not only, this is screaming to be said.
Okay.
Sorry. One of the downfalls about speaking against your pastor or getting together and just nibbling in your conversation, if you're doing that with somebody who's not as grounded in the church, you know, they're going to start questioning. And then if they speak to somebody outside of the church,
It's good. Domino effect.
and that yes, the domino effect of it, that could lead that person who needed desperately to join our church, oh no, I'm not going there.
Yeah.
Because of pants.
Yeah.
Women have to wear dress. Or because they do this function this way or that. It could tear down what God was building.
Yeah, that's great to, and sometimes it's harder for me to say some of this stuff because I am his wife, okay? And so I tend to be a little bit more protective, like, you want to take this on? Are you sure? But he does what he believes God would have him do. The choices he makes, they're there for a reason. You know, we talked about the guidebook at college one time that all of a sudden a rule had to show up that said, you know, it was no holding hands or personal touch, and they had to add in parentheses even for brothers and sisters. And you read it and be like, why on earth would you put that in there? That's because I saw it myself. There was a brother and sister, college age, that would walk around holding hands. You know, so and you wouldn't have known that by opening up the college rule book and reading it. You thought, okay, that is just taking things too far. And I often think people think of some of the things that pastor has implemented here, and you're like, that's just taking things too far. Well, you don't know why, okay? So he has his reasons, so trust him. He's the man of God. Mm-hmm. Again, goes back to, you know, pride. Don't ever think that you have or that I have all the answers. Play my role. Be happy in the role God has me in right now, and trust the leadership that he's given us. So point A under number 3 is they use this as an excuse to speak out of jealousy. He's married to an Ethiopian woman in verse 2. And they said, hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? Oh man, this next phrase, and the Lord heard it.
Mm-hmm.
I, under that, their speaking out against God's chosen man did not go unnoticed. It did not go unheard. Every little grouchy, grumbly, complaining word, thought gets noticed by God. Okay? I have to be so careful of that. The lesson here is that pride and jealousy will cause you to say things you never thought you would. Because think of this, when Miriam was a little girl and she was watching over that baby in the river, she never thought that she would have anything in her heart that would make her speak against that little brother that she was watching, making sure, that everything was going to be okay. She trusted God with that. She was old enough to be able to say, hey, I know a nurse. Okay, so I don't know how much older she was, but old enough, and that same little girl, all of a sudden in chapter 12, we're seeing her get with her brother, and all of a sudden speaking out against that little baby Moses that had grown into a man that God had put in leadership above her. But all of a sudden she knew better. So pride and jealousy will cause you to say things you never thought you would. Despising your role that you're playing and being jealous of someone else's will cause you to say and do and think things you never thought you would. So you don't want to get there. We have to put up barriers. We have to have our heart right with God in order not to do those things. Remember that our words are a reflection of what is in our heart. I can talk to you for a little while and tell you where your heart is and who it's about. Is it about you? And you can do the same with me. Is it about me or is it about God? Talk to my mother for 5 minutes. And you're going to know her life is about God and it's not about her. I on my family, on my sisters and my mom's thread, yesterday I said, I know it's day 9, but I'm doing it with the ladies and it's been so wonderful. Let's do a thankful thing if you want to do it with me. And I said, I'm thankful for airline tickets that were mine and given to us that I can fly back and forth to Maine. I've only paid for one ticket, and that was at the very beginning, and one I had planned on. The rest of my trips have all been paid for through points. And so I was feeling very thankful about that. My mom writes, and I said, so if you want to do this, do it with me. My mom writes, I am thankful, and then she put period after every word. I am thankful for every moment.
Amen. Yep.
And I just thought, that's her world right now. Every moment she is thankful, and she's just going to keep doing this, And I love the period, because sometimes I do that, period after every word, emphasis, So I know, Matthew 12:24. All right, let's go Matthew 12:24. I'll read that real quick. It says, but when the Pharisees heard it, oh, great, Julie, you've got a wrong one here. I don't know what that one is. Yeah, I'll try it later. All right, so anyway, it's about out of the abundance of our hearts. That is the verse 18. No. I'm so bad with the addresses, with the verses. But it talks about how out of the abundance of our heart, that's what comes out of our mouth. That's why you can talk to somebody and know if it's about me or him. Okay, so, and the lesson, pride and jealousy will cause you to say things you never did. Point number 4 in this passage, God heard their murmuring, complaining, jealous talk against his chosen, and he did not like it. In verse 4, God spake suddenly to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. He calls them out in verse 8. Oh, I'm in the wrong passage, so let me go back to Numbers 12. I was going to read it in Matthew. All right, so back to Numbers 12, verse 8.
With him, that one? With
It's
him,
actually,
speak mouth to mouth.
well, that's not really the one I wanted. I wanted where he calls them out. Okay, verse 5. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And actually, the one before it, he called out Moses, Miriam, and Aaron and said, come out. And then he went even further, because the two that spake out were Miriam and Aaron. And he said, basically, you two step out. Well, it's like going to the principal's office on a much larger basis, you know. And he asked him, he said, how could you ever, why would you ever think that this is okay for you to speak out against the man that I don't even talk in dark, what'd he say? Dark speeches, and he said, I speak with him mouth to mouth. So he was just saying, look, I go even further with Moses in my relationship and speaking with him than I do anyone else. How do you even dare talk about him? You know, and I just imagine Miriam and Aaron being pretty scared. You know, God's talking to them like that. And then B says, the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed from them. You know, he was righteously angry at them for what they had done. And in verse 9, C says, verse 9, Miriam became leprous. Like one of the worst things that could happen to a person. Why? Because, first of all, they had these sores all over their body. And they would take like potsherds, that kind of thing, and just scrape, just agony. And they would ooze, and it just, parts of their body, like you get leprosy on their nose, and their nose would fall off, that kind of thing. And they were shut out from people, you know. And they would have to, you know, be on the side of the road or in their own colonies or whatever. It was an awful life to live. And, you know, I put under there, under CI, notice that Aaron is not struck with leprosy. It was Miriam. They both spake against the Lord, but what's that tell you?
Her heart.
And that she was probably the instigator. And, you know, sad to say, so many times it's the woman. Like if a couple leaves our church, sad to say, but it's usually, we can trace it back to the woman. She gets a bee in her bonnet, so to speak, and she gets her husband, and they leave our church. It's happened over and over and over again here. It's almost never the man. You know, the man, you know, but women were run by emotions, even though we shouldn't let our emotions run us. But that's what happens so much of the time. So I think she was the instigator in speaking out. She got Aaron to go along with it, and that's why God struck her with leprosy. He doesn't tell us that, but we do see that Aaron doesn't get it. And then, point 2, Aaron and Moses, the protective brothers, I thought this was kind of sweet. They both go to God and beg him to spare Miriam from this awful life of leprosy. Because, you know, they know what that is going to entail, and she'll be out of the camp and be away from them. And they're still a close group, even though there was gossipy and talk. They're still, you know, family. So why do you suppose that Moses, who was the one spoken against, defended his sister when she had done wrong? Because Aaron said, God, please no. And then Moses spoke right up and said, oh, please don't do this to her. And it was because, I believe, because he knew there was a time in his life where he had done wrong. And he wanted God to give her another chance.
I think that's what meekness actually is.
Yeah, and so it had a lot to do with that too. You're right. But I do think that, you know, I think he understood that we're all capable of this stuff, and that if we do not keep a close relationship with the Lord, that we are prone to do that same thing. We are prone to speak out against God's man, you know, or do things in our life we never thought we would, all because it boils back down to pride. I could do better. I know better. But point 3, God still sentenced Miriam, even though they begged and they said, please, God. He said, no, if her father had spit in her face, which was a custom at that time, there's some different Bible customs, you know, if they did wrong or were found in sin or, you know, that kind of thing, then she would be out of the camp for 7 days, and that's what's going to happen here. So he spared her life and didn't make her have leprosy for the rest of her life, for which she should be very grateful. But she did have it for 7 days, and the group could not travel because she was out of the camp. And so they would have had to leave her, and they weren't going to do that. So they waited the 7 days. The lesson here is that God always hears our prideful, jealous-driven talk, and he hates it. Just like all sin, pride has a cost. Miriam was sent outside of the camp. First of all, she had to stand before God and be reproved. I mean, wouldn't that just have you quaking? And then to look down and see that you, all of a sudden, one of the worst things that could happen to a person in that day happened to her. She didn't know it was only going to be 7 days. She looked down, and she's got leprosy, all because of this, which was from this, because she had pride in her heart. And it's just, it cost, and it cost the others. They had to wait on her 7 days. How many times has my pride caused others to have to wait and not move forward in the cause of Christ? Even like Tiffany said, pride gets you talking to somebody else, the gossipy thing going, I could do this better. And you might not even say it in that way, but that's what it boils down to. And then it affects somebody else and somebody else. So they don't move on for Christ. And, maybe you get it right later, and maybe they never do. Maybe they're always held up because of what happened. What a shame. Proverbs 16:5. You have that?
Yes. Everyone that is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though hand join in hand, he shall not be unpunished.
There was punishment involved for that pride. And so I want to have a close check with God. Ask God to search your heart for any sign of pride. Psalm 129, 23 and 24 on here. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me. God, tell me if I've got a root of pride here that needs to be rooted out before I say or do something that causes detriment to me or causes people to have to wait. Okay? Because pride does cost. Such an interesting lesson. Thank you to our online friends.